Hey everybody, welcome back to the Skookum Report. I have an awesome Bigfoot encounter story for you today. This one's from Delaware, and I'm just going to dive right into it. He writes, "My lifelong friend Vince and I are Delaware residents, and we both go turkey hunting in Pennsylvania every year. Now, we both regarded Bigfoot as something childish. In the spring of 2018, we went to the center of PA to hunt turkeys. After hunting most of the week without even hearing a bird, we decided to hunt this very deep and steep ravine. Now, it had been hot that week, and we figured that maybe the birds had gone down into the ravine to escape the heat. We stood at the top of the ravine and paused and looked down. I said, 'Are we really going to do this?' It was almost a straight mile down. The incline was intimidating. Vince took the first few steps and he fell back and slid down about 20 feet, and I followed right behind him. We began our descent down the ravine. Halfway down, we heard a whining noise off in the distance. It was oscillating up and down and continued on, just whining. I stopped and turned and looked at Vince and said, 'What's that weird noise?' He cocked his head and replied with a question in his voice, 'I don't know, chainsaw?' As if on cue, we heard a tree fall off in the distance, and we both agreed that the weird noise was a chainsaw. I've come to believe that the weird noise was a chainsaw being mimicked, though. On our descent, we heard 4 or 5 more trees fall, but they were preceded by the noise of a chainsaw that lasted only 2 seconds or so. The noise for the first tree, before we even said the word chainsaw, it lasted a long, long time. It was as if once we believed that the noise was a chainsaw, it didn't have to bother doing it as much anymore before the tree fell. To us, it got very strange because there didn't seem to be enough time for a chainsaw to cut through the size trees that we were hearing fall. We also thought the area where the trees were being cut was very strange because this ravine was very steep. We actually had a conversation about it. We were maybe a third of a mile down, or about a half a mile down maybe, and why would there be someone cutting wood a half a mile down a steep ravine when there aren't even any roads to take the wood out? We couldn't understand that. When we finally got to the bottom, almost a mile down, we had to decide which way we were going to hunt. And we decided to walk in the opposite direction of all that noise. The terrain at the bottom was much more open and flat. Imagine, if you will, walking down into the Grand Canyon and then walking along the Colorado River. That's kind of how it was. When we got to the bottom of this great big ravine, we made a big right-hand turn and we were now walking along the creek, perpendicular to our descent. During the whole descent, we had been calling turkey occasionally, but we hadn't heard any replies. We continued to do this as we walked along the creek. To our left was the creek, and to our right was the ravine, and we were in the flat area in between. And we came across a sight that I wish now I had taken a picture of. At this point, we weren't thinking, Bigfoot or Sasquatch or anything like that. There were a line of trees pointing straight up the hill, and they were all snapped off about waist high. Now, they were snapped, not cut, but just snapped. And they were in a pin straight line. None of the tops of the trees were there or visible, and the tree bases looked like they had been alive and healthy. They looked as though they had been recently snapped. All of these trees were about as big around as a man's thigh. I was actually looking at the trees and wondering what had happened to them when my friend Vince stopped and started a conversation about the trees. We both wondered what could have snapped them waist high and all at the same height, but not snapped any of the trees around them. We thought maybe wind shear, not really even knowing what that meant, or maybe a tornado, but that would have knocked down other trees. We also noticed and mentioned, where are the tops of the trees? If it was wind shear or a tornado that snapped those trees, then some of the tops would still be attached or at least within sight. It just didn't look right. No living animal that I'm aware of, not even an elephant probably, could have snapped these trees. It didn't look like any natural phenomenon could have done it either. After the whole day was over and we had time to think about everything, I believe those trees were intentionally snapped by something and put there, probably to be used as a directional marker to point out to what we were about to find on our way back out. Now, I do wish I had taken a picture of them. We had started our descent at about 8:30 in the morning, and it was now about 11 o'clock, and we were allowed to hunt till noon in Pennsylvania. Vince and I thought it would be a good idea if we climbed for the last hour and hunted on the way up, because it was going to be a long, hard climb. We got on Google Maps, unbelievably, because we're surprised we even had service, and we went to the spot that we thought would be the easiest climb, although there were no easy climbs. There were just parts of the hill that were much steeper and almost unclimbable without ropes. We would walk up the hill 10 feet at a time, digging each foot into the ground and pushing off to make the next step, and then hang on to a tree and catch our breath. We did this over and over. We were exhausted. About halfway up the hill, we came across this cave. Now, I was already above the cave, and I'd seen the corner of it as I had passed, but was so exhausted I didn't feel like checking it out or nothing. The path that Vincent was on took him directly in front of the cave. He stopped and said, "There's a cave here." And I asked him, "Is it big enough for a man to go inside?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I asked him, "You want to go in and check it out?" He said, "No." We both laughed at this because this place was noted for rattlesnakes, and it was about 85 degrees out, and the rattlesnakes were probably going to be active. I had to agree, so we kept going. I wish I had taken a picture of the cave, but I didn't. This is when the day got even stranger, strange enough that I started thinking Bigfoot or Sasquatch. We had just passed the cave. We were maybe 50 or 60 yards above it when the biggest tree of the day fell, and it fell right around the cave. The ground shook all around us. I turned to Vince and asked, "Has that ever happened to you before? A tree fall that close to you?" And he said, "No." Maybe 10 minutes later on our climb, Vince started to get lightheaded and actually said he thought he was going to faint. He sat down with his back up to a tree and shut his eyes. And I tried to catch his breath, and it was 11:45 exactly, because I checked my watch to see if I could still turkey hunt while he was resting. I gave a couple of soft hen yelps. To my right, parallel with me on the hill, I heard what sounded to me like a monster woodpecker hit a tree like 2 times. But it sounded like 2 baseball bats coming together. I heard that sequence of 2 knocks repeated like 4 or 5 times. It seemed to be only about 40 yards away or so in the woods, which were pretty thick, but I thought I should be able to see whatever was making that sound. I never saw anything. I still had some time to hunt, so I yelped again, and very softly, and from the same area where the knocks had come from, it sounded like the echo of my yelps. I thought, "That's strange." I heard the whole sequence of the yelps. I had yelped 3 or 4 times, and I had heard the whole 3 or 4 play back for me. That's not what an echo does, plus my yelp call was much too soft for an echo to even occur. So then I thought, maybe it's a mockingbird that's trying to mock my yelp call. I decided to do a test to see if it was mimicking me or just some random bird making a call. I picked the time in my mind, and I don't actually remember the real time, so I'm just going to make one up. Let's say 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And I would wait that time and yelp again. Now, I waited 2 minutes and 45 seconds. I yelped again with an odd sequence, like 1, 2, 3, pause, and then 4. And after I was completely done yelping, the whole sequence came back to me with the exact pause in between the 3 and the 4. Now, I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was a bird like 40 yards away, but I was quite confident it was copying me, whatever it was. After 15 minutes of sitting with his eyes shut, shut, Vince finally recovered enough to push forward to the top of the hill. We were about 3/4 of the way up the hill when we hit a shelf, and on the shelf we saw what looked like a huge nest on the ground. Weeks later, I had asked Vince, who was a Boy Scout leader when his kids were younger, how long would it have taken his troop to make that nest, and he guessed probably about 8 hours. The nest was about 80 yards away from us on the shelf, and I asked Vince if he wanted to go back and look at it, and he said no. So I walked over to it by myself to investigate. The closer I got to this thing, the less comfortable I felt until I couldn't get any closer. I couldn't even bend down to look inside because I was too afraid there might be something in it. I walked around it and getting no closer than maybe 10 yards from it at any time. And this was the last strange thing that happened that day, and I finally took a picture. Now, I went a few weeks before I spoke to Vince again, and we spoke openly and honestly about that day. I wanted to see if he thought it was as strange as I did. Remember, he was asleep for the knocks and the yelps that were being mimicked. He thought that maybe the chainsaw was a real chainsaw that just sounded weird. He explained the tree falling at the cave is something natural that happened in the woods every day. And I have to agree with him, it actually does. It's pretty odd when a tree falls basically moments after you just pass it, though. He couldn't explain the nest, and he agreed with me that it didn't look like a structure that humans would build, but more like an animal built it. I asked him about the snapped trees, and he had no recollection of the broken trees. This was very odd because he was the one that stopped walking and started the conversation about how strange they looked in the first place. Now, to this day, he has no recollection of that conversation or those snapped trees. Now, by this point, I was pretty sure I had some kind of close encounter with what I thought was probably a Bigfoot or several Bigfoots. I called the park people and the state game land people, and they just explained it away as a natural thing that occurs every day, and the nest, they said, was probably made by some deer hunter. But I hunt deer, and in 1,000,000 years, I would never make a nest to hunt out of that was like that. It wouldn't even offer you a 360-degree shot. And also, why go to all that effort when you can just put up a portable ladder stand or some such thing? And why would you go down to the steep ravine deer hunting knowing that you would have to drag a deer up that god-awful hill? The explanations didn't make any sense. Now, the snapped trees pointing up the hill, the cave, and the nest were basically in a straight line. I feel that the nest and the trees were directional markers for the cave. I feel like the cave was being used by something, possibly a Bigfoot, as a dwelling. The final odd occurrence happened 1 week later to the day. I was about 200 miles away, fishing in a creek in Delaware, with a different friend with whom I had not even shared any of the first experience with. As we were fishing, ahead of us maybe 60 yards, there was this huge oak tree which looked upwards about 80 feet tall. About 2/3 of the way up, a huge limb broke off right in front of us. This limb was also about the circumference of a man's thigh. My friend, who was in the front of the canoe, looked at it as it slowly and loudly cracked off and fell to the ground. He commented out loud and said that was strange, and then he got quiet for a minute. And after a minute of ruminating on it, he finally said out loud again, "Do you know why that was strange?" It was strange because that limb was completely healthy, and it had green leaves on it, and healthy branches coming off of it. Why in the world would a healthy limb crack off like that? So I don't know why the second occurrence happened, or if it was related to the first. I have no idea. Can these things communicate to each other? Was it all just natural, serendipitous occurrences? All I know is that it was very strange, a very strange coincidence. Now, a side note, the turkey hunting incident happened in the spring of 2019. I don't think Vince thought it was as strange as I did. The only thing that he really thought was strange was the nest, and he had agreed that it was probably not done by a man, and no animal that we knew of in the woods of Pennsylvania could have done it. In the fall of 2019, we went grouse hunting in roughly the same area. There were 4 of us hunting, and we were walking 60 or so yards apart through a very big woods. My one buddy got kind of turned around, and the rest of us started walking towards him to get him back to us. Vincent was on the end, and I was probably 120 yards to maybe 150 yards away from him. And we could hear our lost buddy yelling far away to try and find us. As the 3 of us, who were about 60 yards apart from each other, started walking towards him, I heard a rifle go off. I didn't think much of it because I was deer hunting. It was deer hunting season, and so I thought it was somebody sighting in their rifle. And later on that day, when Vince and I were alone, Vince asked me if I had heard that rifle go off when we walked in to find our buddy there. And I said, yeah, I heard it. I think it was somebody sighting in their rifle. He said, no, man, that was a tree snapping. Because after that sound we heard, I heard the tree slowly fall and hit the ground. It was actually the sound of a healthy green tree being snapped in two. And it sounded just like a rifle being shot. Vince was the only one that heard that tree, that saw that tree fall. And now he's pretty much a believer. Wow, that's an awesome, awesome story. Thank you so much for sending that. Phew, I don't even know where to start with that one. There's so many odd occurrences. I would expect to walk around the corner and see a Bigfoot after all that. That is really good. Thank you so much. If you or anyone you know has an encounter story or a sighting that you want to share and get up on the channel, just shoot me an email at skookumreport@gmail.com. That's skookumreport@gmail.com. And I'll be sure to get it up on the channel for you. And subscribe and hit that like button and leave a comment and let us know what y'all think, man. If we can do anything, if you have any ideas for the channel or anything like that, greatly appreciate it. All right, you guys take care, and we'll see you next time on the Skookum Report. Bye-bye now.